When my daughter got married, I kept quiet about the truth. My late husband had left me $80 million in beachfront villas along the Carolina coast. I said nothing, and I am grateful for that silence. Because only a week later, my new son-in-law walked into my kitchen with a lawyer by his side, thinking they could take them from me. That is how my story begins. Before I take you further, let me pause here and ask you something. If stories like this resonate with you, if you believe in quiet strength and justice that does not scream but stands tall, please like this video, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support keeps stories like mine alive and helps build a community of people who understand what it means to protect dignity. Now let me return to that day, the day I realized silence had saved me. It started at my daughter's wedding, a grand reception held in one of Charleston's old ballrooms, all chandeliers and polished wood floors. Everyone was dressed in their finest. The music was soft, the laughter louder. But when I walked into the room, holding the corsage I had pinned to my own dress, I noticed immediately where they had placed me. Table 14, near the emergency exit, hidden behind a tall column of white orchids. I sat down quietly, smoothed the folds of my dress, and watched my daughter Lydia enter the room in her gown. She was radiant. She was mine. Yet, I was placed like an afterthought, barely visible in the photographs that would later be shared. It was not an accident. Families do not make accidents like that. From my table, half obscured, I smiled anyway. I clapped when others clapped. I raised my glass when the toast was given. Inside, though, something fractured. I thought of all the years I had stood beside her bed when she was feverish, of the nights I graded papers by her crib's dim light when I was still teaching elementary school. Invisible, that was the role I was given in her new life. And so, I stayed silent. I did not speak of the villas her father, Richard, had built with his life's labor. He had called them the houses of wind and salt. 20 years of construction contracts, storm repairs, and sweat poured into a chain of properties stretching from Myrtle Beach down toward Hilton Head. Each deed carried his name, and before he died, he transferred them into a trust with my name at the center. I can still see him in those final days, his hand, large, calloused from decades of work, gripping mine with surprising strength. His voice was low, urgent, almost pleading. "Helen," he said, "don't tell anyone. Don't sign anything. One day, you'll understand why." At the time, I did not know what he meant. Now I do. Because a week after that wedding, I heard a knock on my front door. I opened it to find Ethan, my brand new son-in-law, standing there in a pressed shirt, a smile too polished to be genuine. Beside him stood a stranger, a man in a dark suit carrying a briefcase, a lawyer. "Mother," Ethan began, with a tone that was too smooth to belong to family, "we thought we'd stop by to help you with some important paperwork, just to make sure you're safe, now that you're living alone." They followed me into the kitchen. I placed my teacup on the table, the steam still curling upward. The lawyer slid a thick folder across the wood. On the cover, bold black letters, "Durable Power of Attorney." Ethan smiled again, resting his hand lightly on the folder. "It's just a formality. Lydia and I want to make sure you're cared for, that nothing ever goes wrong with the villas, the bank accounts, everything your husband left behind." My spoon slipped against the side of my cup with a soft metallic chime. The sound was small, yet it rang inside me like a bell. That sound told me the truth. They weren't here to protect me. They were here to strip me of the very thing Richard had worked to preserve. I looked at the folder. I looked at Ethan. I said nothing. Silence, once again, became my armor. And that is where the real story begins. I should tell you who I am, so you understand the woman who sat in that kitchen with a lawyer's folder pushed across her table. My name is Helen Marlowe. I am 67 years old. For most of my life, I was an elementary school teacher in Charleston, South Carolina. I taught children how to read their first sentences, how to count apples on a page, how to stand up in front of the class and say their names clearly. Patience was my profession. Dignity was my compass. Now I live alone, in a modest 2-story house painted the pale blue that Richard once called sea glass. The shutters are white, though the paint has begun to peel at the edges. Out front, I tend a small garden where roses climb a trellis Richard built for me years ago. The roses are stubborn. Even when storms lash at them, they return in spring with a fragrance that reminds me of the vows we made when we were young. Inside my house, everything has its place. The kettle sits on the stove, polished from years of use. A row of teacups hangs neatly above the sink. On the shelf in the hallway rests a small metal box, my husband's old safe, scuffed from moving it between job sites in his construction days. In that safe are not only deeds and documents, but pieces of our history. Photographs with curled edges, letters Richard wrote when he traveled for work, the birth certificate of our only child. It is more than a container for paper. It is the vault of our life. I carry the key to that safe in the pocket of my cardigan. Always. It is brass, heavy for its size, warm from my body heat. Sometimes, when I am nervous, I close my hand around it as if I am holding Richard's hand again. That key is not just metal. It is reassurance. Every morning, I make tea before the sun has fully risen. I set 2 cups on the table out of habit, though I drink from only one. Steam curls upward, soft and silent. The empty cup is not for a guest who will arrive. It is for the memory of Richard, who sat across from me for 42 years, who reached for my hand even in silence. The ritual anchors me. It reminds me that even though I am alone in this house, I am not without presence. Richard was a builder in every sense of the word, not just of houses, but of stability, of dreams. He started with small contracts, deck repairs, roof replacements, before moving on to larger projects along the coast. He had a vision to create homes that stood against the wind and salt, places where families could gather without fear of the next storm. Wind and salt, he used to say, are the true test of any wall. He would run his hand along the beams, nodding as if he could already hear the ocean challenging his work. Over 2 decades, he built a chain of beachfront villas from Myrtle Beach down to Hilton Head. They were not hotels. They were not glossy vacation rentals. They were homes, each one solid, rooted, tested by hurricanes and repaired by his own hands. He called them the houses of wind and salt, and he loved them almost as if they were children of his labor. When he became sick, the work slowed. His body could no longer bear the weight of lumber or the sting of ocean air. But his mind remained sharp, and his concern was not for himself, but for me. I remember the night he placed the trust documents into the safe. His face was pale, his breath shallow, Yet his eyes held the same determination I had seen on scaffolding 30 years before. "Helen," he said, gripping my hand so hard I felt his pulse in my palm. "Promise me this. Don't tell anyone what I've left you. Don't sign anything, not a single page, not until you have to. These villas, they're more than money. They are the proof of what we built together." I nodded, though tears blurred my vision. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Lydia, our daughter, had always been close to me, and I believed she would never let anyone treat me with anything but respect. Richard must have sensed something I did not. After his funeral, the house felt cavernous, though the walls were the same. The roses bloomed anyway. The kettle still whistled, and the safe, tucked into the hallway, seemed heavier than ever. I carried the key in my pocket from that day forward, unable to part with it. It was not only a key to documents worth $80 million in property, it was a key to my dignity, my independence, my future. Sometimes late at night I would sit at the table, the brass key in one hand, my teacup in the other, and whisper into the empty air, "I hear you, Richard. I won't sign. I won't let go." And yet, even with his words echoing in me, nothing prepared me for how quickly the test would come. A wedding where I was hidden behind orchids. A week later, a knock on the door. A lawyer's folder sliding across my kitchen table. My spoon striking the cup like a bell. That was the moment I realized. The houses of wind and salt were not just Richard's legacy. They were also my armor. The morning after the folder hit my table, I heard the soft knock I always recognize. 3 taps, a pause, 2 taps. I opened the door to find Margaret on my porch, with a warm pan wrapped in a dish towel. The scent of butter and corn rose like a small mercy. "I brought cornbread," she said, stepping past me as if she were returning a book. "And I brought eyes." Something happened here. Margaret is my neighbor 2 houses down, a widow like me. She lost her husband, Frank, 10 winters ago. She keeps her hair short and her sentences shorter. She sets the pan on my counter, scans the room, and notices the teacup, the second empty cup, the folder now tucked beneath a placemat as if paper could be shamed into behaving. She does not ask permission. She lifts the placemat and reads the bold type, "Durable power of attorney." Her jaw does not drop. She only exhales through her nose, the way a carpenter checks a warped board. "Who brought this?" she says. Not a question. "Ethan," I answer, "with a lawyer." She nods once, a verdict without the gavel. "I saw them leave. The suit carried himself like he owned your house." We sit at the kitchen table. I pour tea. Margaret refuses milk. I cut the cornbread and watch the steam rise. The smell makes the room feel less like a courtroom and more like a kitchen again. She takes a bite, points with the corner of the slice. "Say it out loud, Helen." "They want me to sign," I say. "They say it is for my safety." Margaret chews slowly. She is building time for me to find my footing. She sets the bread down and wipes her fingers on the towel. "Don't let silence become shackles. Turn it into armor." The line lands where my spine begins. I feel myself straighten. "Armor," I repeat. She taps the folder. A signature like that is a door that only swings one way. Ask me how I know. So I do. Margaret tells me about the spring after Frank died, about a nephew who called every Sunday with a voice like honey. He said the word protection so many times it started to sound like a hymn. He brought a notary and a bouquet to her porch on the same afternoon. When she hesitated, he laughed and told the notary to give them a minute, The laughter did not belong in a living room. She did not sign. He did not call again. That silence, she says, hurt, but it healed. The other kind, the kind where you sign to make the room quiet, that wound doesn't close. I take the brass key from my cardigan pocket and turn it in my palm. Margaret sees it. She always sees what I try to hide. She nods at the safe in the hallway. Richard left you more than paper, she says. He left you a way to stand. I look at the roses through the window. The trellis he built with leftover cedar still holds. I hear the lawyer's words. Safeguards. Efficiency. Today. I hear Richard's words. Do not sign. My chest tightens, not with fear, but with clarity. Ethan called me mother, I say, the word thin on my tongue, as if the word itself were a key. Margaret snorts, a dry sound. People love the word family when they need a shortcut to your life. Keys belong to owners, not visitors. We eat in a plain rhythm. Slice, sip, breathe. Margaret asks for the facts the way a nurse checks vitals. Who drafted the document? Who benefits? Who holds the pen when the pen shakes? She listens without interrupting. When I pause, she gives me a list. It sounds like a grocery run, which calms me. Here is what you do today, she says. You call James O'Connor, the man your Richard trusted. You make a rule, and you write it down. No documents without counsel. Drafts in advance. Meetings scheduled by your attorney. Put the rule on a card near your door. If they call you difficult, call it measured. I smile, small and grateful. Margaret has a way of turning fear into verbs. She stands and walks to the shelf with the safe. She does not touch it. She only looks at it with respect, as if the safe were a person who earned it. People think strength is volume, she says. It is paperwork and boundaries, repeated calmly. I think of Lydia, her wedding veil moving like a pale river, her eyes avoiding mine when the photographer arranged the mothers. I taste the cornbread turn to salt in my mouth. If I do this, I may lose her, I say. You may, Margaret answers. She does not decorate the truth. Or you may teach her the one lesson that lasts. Love, without boundaries, becomes theater. She will learn where love actually stands. We carry our cups to the porch. The morning is bright. The street still quiet. The roses throw shadows shaped like lace. Margaret leans on the rail. You know what else makes armor, she says. Other women who have done this before you. She tells me about the church group that meets on Tuesdays. Widows and grandmothers who trade notes on fraud alerts and voice passwords. On how to freeze credit and thaw it. On how to ask for a second opinion without apologizing. I laugh once. The sound surprises me. A classroom for the retired, I say. A classroom for the underestimated, she corrects, smiling. You taught children to stand and say their names. Now you will teach yourself to do it again. We fall into an easy quiet, the kind that holds rather than presses. A breeze comes off the water, tang of salt, hint of sun creams from someone's open window. Margaret looks at my hands. They no longer tremble. She puts a folded paper on the table, a phone number written in her neat block letters. Call James by noon, she says. If your voice shakes, call me first. I will stand in the room while you dial. I reach for her hand. It is warm, dry, steady. Thank you, I say. She squeezes once, a seal without ink. If they come again, she says, and you do not want to open the door, call me. I will walk over with my coffee. Two women on a porch are a stronger door than oak. We return to the kitchen. I wipe the counter, put the cornbread in a tin, slide the folder back into the light. Margaret watches me write on an index card in clear, slow letters. I do not sign documents presented without counsel. All meetings through attorney James O'Connor. Drafts 48 hours in advance. I tape the card beside the door. The tape crackles, a small, satisfying sound. Margaret nods, the kind of nod that closes a chapter and opens a plan. She picks up her coat. At the threshold, she turns. "Armor on, Helen," she says. "Let them find a woman, not a signature." After she leaves, I stand at the sink and let the water run cold. I touch the key. I touch the card. I touch the safe. The house feels taller by an inch. I dry my hands on the dish towel and reach for the phone. James will answer on the second ring. He always does. By noon that day, after Margaret left me with her firm words and her folded paper of phone numbers, I called James O'Connor. Richard had trusted him for years. He was not flashy. His office was a converted brick townhouse near the courthouse. His suits were rumpled by late afternoon, but he was steady, and steady was what I needed. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and certain. "Helen," he said, "I've been expecting your call." I froze for a moment. "Expecting?" "Richard told me you would need me," James replied. "He made me promise that if your name ever came up in my voicemail, I would drop everything and come." True to his word, he was at my door an hour later. He carried a leather briefcase, scratched at the edges, thick with files. His presence filled the kitchen without noise. He set the case on the table and looked at me over his glasses. "Show me what they brought." I slid the folder across to him. He flipped through the pages, nodding as if he had already seen this play staged a dozen times. "Durable power of attorney," he muttered. "Broad language, immediate effect, no safeguards." He closed the folder with a sharp clap. "They want access to everything without condition." My stomach turned. I clutched the brass key in my pocket, felt its cold bite. Richard told me not to sign. He said I would understand one day. James leaned forward. His eyes softened, but his voice carried weight. He was right. "Helen, what Richard left you is not just money. It is not just property. It is a fortress. He built these villas like he built his houses, layer by layer, reinforced against the storm. The trust he set up is more than a legal form. It is his wall of stone around you." "A fortress," I repeated, tasting the word. "Yes. This is not a treasure to be plundered. This is a citadel to stand in. He designed it so that no one, no child, no in-law, no stranger in a suit can take it without your consent and without the law agreeing. But fortresses need maintenance. That is where we begin." He opened his case and drew out forms, neatly clipped. "We will record the deeds again at the county office to refresh them in your name. We will freeze your credit with the 3 bureaus, so no one can open accounts against your identity. We will establish a healthcare directive naming Margaret as your proxy before Lydia, so no one can use illness to argue incapacity. And we will set up a standing rule with your bank. No transactions without your personal signature, verified in person." I listened as though he were teaching me a new subject, as I once taught children how to read. Letters formed into words, words formed into a shield. Each measure he described was a brick laid into Richard's wall. "Will it be enough?" I asked. James smiled, a brief curve. "Enough and more. By the time we are done, You will not only hold the fortress, you will know every gate and key by heart. He placed the first form in front of me. My hand trembled slightly as I lifted the pen. I thought of Ethan's smooth voice calling me mother. I thought of Lydia's downcast eyes. I thought of Richard's last grip. I pressed the pen down. The line of my name looked like a bridge between what I had been and what I was becoming. James stamped the form with a notary seal he carried. The red ink sank into the paper with a dry, final sound. Thud. That sound did not echo like defeat. It rang like a drum, steady and protective. We moved through the documents one by one. Directive, deed, bank authorization. Each signature was a breath I had been holding for weeks. Each stamp, another thud in rhythm, as if Richard himself were knocking from beyond to say, "Yes, this is the way." At one point, I paused, pen hovering. What if Lydia hates me for this? What if she believes Ethan's words over mine? James looked directly at me. Then she learns the truth slowly. Paperwork is not emotion. It is boundary. Love can return, but a fortress once breached does not rebuild so easily. You are protecting her too, whether she knows it yet or not. Tears stung my eyes, but I did not let them fall. I pressed my name onto the final page, firm and unshaken. James stamped again. Thud. When we finished, the table was covered in signed papers, small stacks forming a new architecture of safety. James gathered them with care, slipping them back into his case. "I will file these first thing in the morning," he said. "By this time next week, no stranger will stand a chance." I exhaled, long and heavy, as though I had carried a weight across decades. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I felt not only his absence, but his presence, woven into the paper, the ink, the seal. James rose, shook my hand, and left with a quiet promise. "Call me before you ever open the door to them again." When the door closed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The late afternoon sun stretched across the floor, catching the brass key still in my pocket. I drew it out, turned it in my palm, and for the first time, it felt less like a reminder of loss and more like a piece of armor. I touched the key to the folder, now stamped and signed. The house around me seemed taller, sturdier, as if Richard's walls had risen again. I had entered this day reactive, shaken, nearly cornered. Now, with each thud of the seal still echoing in my ears, I felt the shift inside me. I was no longer the woman at the back of the wedding, hidden by orchids. I was the woman holding the fortress, and I knew I was ready for the storm. It was only 3 days after James left my kitchen with the signed papers when I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. I glanced out the window. Lydia stepped out first, smoothing the skirt of her dress, her eyes darting toward the roses along my porch as if they could explain her nervousness. Behind her came Ethan, his hand lightly resting at her back, guiding her toward the door with the confidence of someone who believed the ground belonged to him. I did not rush to greet them. I let them ring the bell twice, then opened the door slowly. The air between us was heavy with politeness, that brittle kind of politeness that cracks under its own weight. "Mother," Ethan said, smiling the way a salesman does when he rehearses in the mirror. "We thought we'd stop by to check on you. We worry, with you being alone in this house. Lydia insisted we come." Lydia's eyes flickered at his words. She nodded, but the movement was small, almost reluctant. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. They settled at the kitchen table where Richard and I had spent decades sharing tea. I placed cups before them, though only Lydia touched hers. Ethan spread his hands wide over the wood, as if claiming it for himself. "You've had so much responsibility on your shoulders," he began. "The villas, the maintenance, the taxes. Lydia and I just want to lighten your load. We want to take care of you." Lydia reached across the table, brushing her fingers against mine. "It's true, Mom. We lie awake sometimes thinking about you here. What if something happens and no one is around? You shouldn't have to carry all this by yourself." Their voices overlapped like waves, steady and insistent, words dressed in the clothes of concern. But beneath, I heard the calculation. Ethan's cadence was too smooth, Lydia's phrases too polished, as though rehearsed in the car ride over. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I stirred my tea, the spoon clicking against the porcelain in an even rhythm. Silence stretched, not awkward, but deliberate, like the pause between two movements of a symphony. Inside, I thought, I hear them the way one hears wind against a window. Persistent, insistent, but never touching the core of the house. Their words rattled, but they did not enter. Ethan leaned closer. "Imagine, Mother, how much simpler life could be if we handled the details. You could travel, join clubs, spend time with friends. Leave the business side to us." I met his eyes then, calm and unblinking. My silence unsettled him. He shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, and tried again. "It isn't about money. It's about family. We don't want you burdened, family." He said the word like it was a key that would open any door. I kept my lips closed, my gaze steady. Lydia squeezed my hand gently, her eyes softening. "Please, Mom. We only want what's best for you." Still, I remained quiet. I let the weight of my silence fill the room until Ethan finally leaned back, frustration flickering behind his smile. Lydia withdrew her hand, folding it in her lap. I lifted my cup and sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. Then I set it down and said only one sentence, my voice even. "I'll think about it." Not a promise, not a concession, only words to end the performance. They exchanged glances, Lydia's full of hope, Ethan's shadowed by impatience. He rose first, pulling Lydia with him. "We'll check back soon," he said. His tone suggested inevitability, as though my walls were already crumbling. When the door closed behind them, I stood in the quiet. My shoulders relaxed, my breath released. I walked to the safe in the hallway, ran my fingers over the cool metal. The key in my pocket pressed against my thigh, reassuring, solid. I whispered to the empty air, perhaps to Richard, perhaps to myself. They speak of care, but it is control they crave. They speak of family, but it is possession they mean. The roses outside swayed in the breeze, their stems unbroken. I thought of Margaret's words, silence as armor. I had worn that armor today, not with anger, not with shouting, but with stillness. And though they left without victory, I knew this was not the end. Family tides pull harder than strangers. The undercurrent had begun. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I drove to the grocery store on Meeting Street. The list in my pocket was ordinary. Bread, milk, tea bags, roses, if they had them fresh. The kind of list that makes life feel steady. I parked near the back, where the shade from an oak tree stretched across the asphalt. The air smelled of salt and exhaust, the mix of coastal wind and city traffic. I had just locked my car when I heard a familiar voice. Ethan. His voice was lower than usual, sharp at the edges, carrying urgency instead of polish. I froze. He was standing 3 rows over, phone pressed to his ear. His back was to me, his shoulders tense. I ducked behind a row of carts, left crooked in their stall, the brass key in my cardigan pressing against my ribs as though it too was listening. "Yes, Mom, I know," Ethan was saying. His words cut the air like stones skipping water. "I've already tried the bank. They won't extend us anymore. Not with the numbers we're showing." There was a pause as Patricia, his mother, spoke on the other end. I could not hear her words, but Ethan's reply was clear enough. "I'm telling you, if Helen signs the power of attorney, we'll have access. We can refinance the villas, sell 2 or 3 quick. That will clear the debt, keep the company afloat. Without that, we're sunk. It's over." The world seemed to tilt under me. Bread and milk vanished from my mind. All that remained was the sound of his desperation, the calculation hidden beneath his false concern. He turned slightly, pacing. "Yes, I know it's risky, but we don't have a choice. The creditors are circling. If Helen doesn't sign Patricia, we lose everything. Do you hear me? Everything." His voice cracked on the last word, raw and unpracticed. Nothing like the calm charm he had laid across my kitchen table. It was the sound of a man cornered, not a son concerned for his wife's mother. I stepped back into the shadow of the oak tree. My breath came shallow, but I made no sound. I could have confronted him there, could have let him see me and feel the weight of his own words thrown back at him. Instead, I chose silence. Silence is not absence. Silence is choice. I thought of Richard's warning, "Do not sign." I thought of Margaret's voice, "Let silence be armor." I stood there in that patch of shade, invisible, while Ethan poured out the truth he never meant for me to hear. "I'll get her to sign," he said after a pause. "Don't worry, Mom. She's old, she's soft. She'll see reason. She just needs more pressure. Lydia will help. Between the 2 of us, she won't resist for long." Old. Software words meant to shrink me. Words spoken as strategy, not family. My hand tightened around the cart handle until my knuckles whitened. I could feel the tremor of anger rising, but I did not move toward him. I stayed in the shadow, unseen. The silence was mine, and it was stronger than confrontation. A seagull shrieked overhead, landing near a dropped bag of chips. Ethan swore under his breath, turned back toward his car, and drove off, still speaking into the phone. I waited until the sound of his engine disappeared before stepping out. The parking lot was ordinary again. Carts rattled, children laughed near the entrance. A woman loaded oranges into her trunk. But for me, everything had shifted. I walked into the store, picked up bread and milk like a woman who had not just overheard betrayal. But inside, I carried something heavier than groceries. I carried the knowledge that Ethan's kindness was a costume, his marriage to Lydia a mask covering desperation. I carried the proof that this was not about me, not even about Lydia. It was about debt, failure, survival, and they wanted to use me as their rescue. When I returned home, I placed the groceries on the counter. I made tea, pouring the water slowly so the steam curled into the air. I set out 2 cups, as always. I whispered toward the empty one. "Richard, you were right. This was never about love. It was about desperation dressed as duty." I lifted the brass key from my pocket and set it beside the teacup. Its weight on the table was steady, immovable. I thought of Ethan's words, old, soft, and felt the opposite rise in me. I was not diminished. I was defined. I did not need to confront him in that parking lot. The truth had revealed itself, and it belonged to me alone. That was enough. Silence, once again, had become my armor. And this time, it felt unbreakable. It was late afternoon when I heard a car pull up, the engine quieter than Ethan's truck. I peeked through the curtain and saw Lydia step out alone. She walked up the path slowly, her heels clicking against the stone like hesitant knocks, before her hand ever reached the door. When I opened it, I saw her eyes already red, her face pale. She clutched her purse to her chest as if it might shield her. "Mom," she whispered, her voice catching. "Please, can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting her in. The house smelled of tea and roses from the garden. She sat at the table where so much had unfolded already. I set a cup before her, but she did not touch it. She gripped the edge of the table instead, knuckles white. Then the words broke out, raw and sharp. "Why don't you trust me? Why don't you believe that I want to help you? You've always trusted me before. Why not now?" Her tears came fast, streaking her cheeks. I watched her, my daughter, the child I had once held against my chest when fevers shook her small body, the girl I had walked to school on her first day, the teenager I had waited up for when she stayed out late. Every memory pressed at me, urging me to gather her in my arms, to soothe her like I once did. My hand lifted, instinctive. But halfway across the table, it faltered. Instead of reaching for her hand, I set it down gently on my teacup. The porcelain was warm under my palm. My silence stretched across the space between us. Lydia's voice rose, sharp with grief. "Ethan says you think we're trying to take everything. How could you believe that? He's my husband. He wants to make sure you're safe. And me, I'm your daughter. Why can't you see that?" Her words pierced, but I held steady. Inside, I thought, I hear you, but I hear the wind too, rushing, insistent, never touching the heart of the house. Finally, I spoke. My voice was low, deliberate. "Lydia, I do trust you. I trust you enough to have kept silent about what your father left me. I trusted you with my pride when I sat at that wedding table, hidden behind flowers. I trusted you when I believed you would still see me as part of your life. But trust is not the same as signing." She flinched. "So you don't love me anymore?" I leaned forward, my hand still resting on the teacup. Number boundaries are not the absence of love. They are the way love survives, without being twisted. If I sign, I lose more than property. I lose the chance to still be your mother, not your burden, not your bank. By saying no, I am loving you the only way I still can. Her lip trembled. She shook her head. "Ethan says," I cut in, my tone firmer. "Ethan says many things. I overheard him with his mother. He spoke not of care, but of debt, of companies ready to collapse, of using my signature as their rope. If you had heard him, you would know the truth I know. His worry is not for me. It is for himself." Her breath hitched. She looked down, fingers twisting at the strap of her purse. "You spied on us?" "I listened," I said, "because silence is sometimes the only way to hear the truth." The room went still. A clock ticked. The kettle hissed faintly from the stove. My daughter sat before me, torn between loyalty to her husband and the echo of her upbringing. At last, she whispered, "You don't forgive me, do you?" My throat tightened. "Lydia, forgiveness is not the question. Forgiveness is for mistakes of the heart. This is about survival, about the fortress your father built to protect us. I cannot trade that away, not even for you. One day, I pray you will see that I am not your enemy. I am the mother still keeping a roof over your name, even if you can't accept it yet." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. For a moment, I nearly rose, nearly went around the table to hold her. But I stayed where I was. My love had to take a different shape now, a shape with walls. The thematic truth settled heavy in the room. Trust is not the same as signing. Boundaries are the proof that love remains. Lydia lifted her head, eyes swollen. She looked at me as if I were a stranger, and yet something familiar all the same. "I don't know how to feel," she said. "You don't have to know today," I answered. "But remember this, my silence is not rejection. It is protection." She stood, unsteady. Her hand hovered over the table, as if she might touch mine. At the last second, she withdrew, clutching her purse again. She walked to the door without another word. I followed only as far as the hallway. The door clicked shut. Her car started, backed out, disappeared down the street. I returned to the kitchen, touched the cup still warm under my palm. I whispered to Richard, to the roses outside, maybe to myself. I chose the line today, the line that says love and loss can exist in the same breath. The house was quiet again, but inside me, the conflict thundered. A mother's instinct to embrace, a woman's duty to guard. I did not know yet what it would cost. That night, after Lydia left with her eyes swollen and her words unfinished, the house felt heavier than usual. The roses outside brushed against the window in the wind, but inside, everything was still. I made tea and set down 2 cups, though I barely touched mine. My hand hovered over the brass key in my cardigan pocket, then slipped away. Even that anchor felt too heavy to hold. I walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, the one where Richard used to sketch blueprints when the dining table grew too cluttered. The lamp cast a circle of yellow light on the wooden surface. In the drawer, I kept a stack of stationery, cream-colored with faint blue lines. I took out a sheet, uncapped a pen, and let the ink flow. "Richard," I began, the words forming slowly. "Tonight I feel both strong and broken. I stood firm, as you told me to. I did not sign. But the cost of keeping your fortress intact is watching our daughter drift further from me." The pen scratched, steady but heavy. I wrote of the look in Lydia's eyes, the way her hand hovered but did not touch mine. I wrote of Ethan's voice in the parking lot, sharp with desperation. I wrote of my silence at the table, how it cut through his charm, how it made me feel both powerful and painfully alone. "Do you know what hurts, Richard?" I wrote. "Not their greed, not the paper they push across the table. What hurts is seeing our child, the girl we raised with bedtime stories and Sunday pancakes, look at me as if I am the enemy. I never imagined that saying no to her could feel like a betrayal, even when I know it is the only way to protect her." I paused, the pen balanced above the page, and let the tears fall quietly. They left small dark spots on the paper, circles spreading until the words blurred. I kept writing anyway. "You built villas that could withstand wind and salt. You built them strong because you knew storms would come. But how do I build walls that can survive a storm inside my own family? How do I keep loving her without surrendering what you worked for? Tonight, I fear I might lose her. And yet, if I yield, I will lose myself." The kettle whistled faintly in the kitchen, but I did not move. I pressed the nib harder into the paper. Richard, I promised you. I will not sign. But sometimes I wonder if I am strong enough to bear the loneliness that comes with keeping that promise. You were my partner, my compass. Now I sit here alone, writing to paper as if it could speak back. I stopped, stared at the ink, then added one more line. If silence is armor, why does it feel so heavy on my shoulders? The clock on the wall ticked into the late hours. My tea had grown cold, untouched. The second cup sat across from me. Steam long vanished. I folded the letter carefully, pressing the creases with my fingers. My instinct was to place it in an envelope, to address it as though the mail could still carry words to the dead. But I knew better. This was not meant to travel outward. It was meant to mirror inward. I opened the drawer again and slipped the folded letter inside. It landed atop a growing stack. Letters written in the months since Richard passed, none of them ever sent. Each one carried a piece of my heart, my doubts, my half-spoken confessions. Together, they formed a diary of grief and resilience, unsent but not wasted. I closed the drawer gently, the sound soft as a sigh. Then I sat back, looking at the desk where Richard once drew lines on paper to create walls and windows, rooms and roofs. I realized that I had been doing the same. My words were my blueprints, my silence, my walls. The night deepened. I stood, carried my cold tea to the sink, and rinsed the cup. The brass key clinked against the counter as I set it down beside me. I dried my hands, then picked up the key again, slipping it back into my pocket. Its weight grounded me, not as a burden, but as a reminder. Before going to bed, I touched the drawer where the letter rested. "Good night, Richard," I whispered. "The fortress still stands, but sometimes the builder needs rest." I turned off the lamp, leaving the house in darkness except for the moonlight falling across the roses outside. The silence of the night wrapped around me. This time, though, it did not feel like chains. It felt like a shield I was learning to carry. Sunday, after service, the fellowship hall smelled like coffee and powdered sugar. Folding tables wore plastic cloths printed with faded lemons. Children chased each other between chairs, while the choir director stacked hymnals in a neat tower. Margaret hooked her arm through mine and steered me toward a round table near the bulletin board. "Sit," she said. "Listen." 3 women made space without ceremony. Ruth wore a blue scarf and a smile that curved only when necessary. Bernice had sturdy shoes and a small diamond that flashed when she lifted her paper cup. Althea kept a notebook with lined pages and a pen that clicked like a metronome. Margaret introduced them with the clean efficiency of someone setting a table. Ruth raised 3 boys and a mortgage. Bernice buried 2 husbands and 1 bad investment. Althea saved half the church from signing what they should not. I folded my hands around a styrofoam cup. Steam rose. The coffee was too strong and exactly right. Ruth began, her voice low and even. "After my Harold died," she said, "my oldest came with a binder. Tabs and highlights. Looked like care. He said he wanted to take the load. He wanted to consolidate accounts, streamline, modernize. He used all the verbs that make a mother feel small. I said no. He did not visit for 6 months. He visits now. He brings pie. He learned that no did not mean I stopped loving him." Bernice nodded, turning her cup so the seam faced the wall. My niece showed up with a notary and a bouquet. Wanted me to sign a deed transfer so she could pre-manage the house. I put the pen down and baked a cake instead. She called me cold. I called it clear. We speak again. We do not sign again. Althea clicked her pen twice, then opened her notebook. I keep lists, she said, as if confessing to a harmless vice. When people are grieving, paper becomes wind. It blows where it wants. Lists give it weight. Freeze credit with all 3 bureaus. Add a voice password at the bank. Put a card on the door that reads, "No documents accepted without counsel. Drafts 48 hours in advance. Keep a call log, date, time, exact words. Logs win when memories get shiny." Margaret squeezed my arm once, a silent chorus beneath the spoken one. I felt the brass key in my cardigan pocket and the ghost of the red notary thud inside my chest. I told them about the parking lot, about Ethan's voice stripped of polish, about the word old said like a strategy. Their faces did not change, only their attention leaned forward. Ruth spoke first. "Desperation wears good shoes," she said. "It knocks like family and says please. It stands very close and smells like cologne." Bernice blew on her coffee. "People call it duty when they want your signature. I have learned to hear the difference between worry and appetite." Althea tapped her pen against the notebook. 2 soft beats. "What did you say to your daughter?" she asked. "I told her trust is not the same as signing," I said. "That boundaries are how love survives." Bernice's diamond flashed again as she nodded. "That sentence needs to live on a refrigerator." Ruth leaned in. Her scarf brushed the table. "Saying no is not fighting your child," she said. "Saying no is how you stay their mother." Children cannot lean on air. The room swelled with the small noises of Sunday, spoons touching plates, the piano bench scraping the floor, a baby hiccuping, and then sighing. I looked at these women and felt my shoulders lower by an inch. The loneliness that had draped itself over me since the wedding shifted, not gone, but shared. Margaret broke a sugar cookie in half and set the larger piece on my napkin. "We are not here to make you braver," she said. "You already are. We are here so the wind has more bodies to push against." Althea slid a photocopy from her notebook. It was a single page printed in a plain font. At the top, a heading, "Practical Comforts." Under it, lines that would look like nothing to anyone who had never weathered this kind of storm. Freeze credit, TransUnion, Equifax, Experian, confirm by mail. Banknote, in-person only, dual employee verification, voice password. Healthcare proxy, primary you trust to say no when you cannot, secondary for backup. Door card, no documents without counsel. Drafts 48 hours in advance. Call log, date, time, exact words, no summaries. Threshold rule. You do not decide at the door. You decide at the table after tea. I traced the last line with my finger. Threshold rule. It felt like something Richard would have said while measuring a beam. Simple, strong. Bernice tilted her head. "You are a teacher," she said. "Teach your daughter what a boundary looks like in daylight. Invite her to watch you pay a bill, to see the ledger, to hold a wrench while you tighten something. Let her see that you are not refusing help. You are refusing surrender." The words settled where grief had kept its chair. A different weight took its place, steadier, inhabitable. I breathed, slow and deep. Ruth finished her coffee and stood, smoothing the scarf. "I tell my boys this," she said. "Saying no is not against you. It is how I keep myself. When I keep myself, the door stays open for a better yes later." Margaret laughed, short and bright. "There you go," she said. Put that on the other side of the refrigerator. We lingered, the way women do when the conversation has done its work, but no one wants to break the circle. Finally, Althea closed her notebook and handed me a little stack of blank index cards. For your door, your log, your pocket, she said. Write clean. Tape corners. Watch how differently people speak when they see a rule. On our way out, the bell rang noon. Sun pooled on the church steps. The air smelled faintly of lilies left from a funeral earlier in the week. Margaret took my hand and squeezed. Ruth waved her scarf. Bernice pointed at my cardigan pocket where the key made a small square. Althea tapped her notebook against her hip like a drum. At the bottom of the steps, I paused. Threshold again. I looked back into the hall where the table still held crumbs and paper cups and the imprint of our elbows. The chorus of wisdom had not been loud. It had been precise. And in that precision, I found a kind of peace I had not felt since Richard pressed the safe key into my palm. As we crossed the parking lot, I felt the key's weight and the lightness of company. Both truths could live in one body. I said the sentence aloud, first to myself, then to Margaret. Saying no is not against them. It is how I keep me. Good, she said. Now go home and tape it to your door. The text arrived on a Wednesday evening, just as I was trimming the roses near the porch. The phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my hands on my apron and read the screen. It was from Ethan. Friday, we'll bring a notary over. Just formalities. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes. For a long moment, I stood there in the fading light, the scent of roses thick around me, the brass key pressing against my hip through the fabric. Formalities. That word clanged in my head like a dull bell. Richard's voice rose in memory. Do not sign. And Margaret's warning echoed. Don't let silence be shackles. Make it armor. I walked into the kitchen, placed the phone on the counter, and brewed a pot of tea. Steam curled upward, slow and calm. I set 2 cups out as I always did. Then I typed my reply, deliberate. Every word a stone placed in a wall. Please contact attorney James O'Connor. All meetings and documents must go through him. I pressed send. No explanation, no apology. A full stop at the end. My hands did not tremble. The next 2 days were quiet, but not empty. A current ran beneath the silence, tense and expectant, like air before a thunderstorm. On Friday afternoon, the storm arrived. At 3 o'clock, sharp, tires crunched on my gravel drive. I watched through the lace curtain as Ethan stepped out, phone in hand, his face tight. He did not bring a notary. He brought his temper. The knock rattled the door hard enough to shake the frame. I walked down the hallway slowly, each step measured. I stopped on my side of the threshold, my hand resting lightly on the doorknob, but not turning it. Mother. His voice was sharp, stripped of charm. Why are you making this difficult? We're just trying to protect you. The brass key in my pocket grew warmer with each pound of his fist against the wood. I stayed silent. Silence, I reminded myself, is not weakness. Silence is choice. The knocking grew louder. Open the door. This is ridiculous. Do you know how much trouble you're causing? Lydia's upset. The company's hanging by a thread and you're playing stubborn. Do you want us ruined? Is that what you want? My heart thudded, but I did not move. I let his words slam against the door the way wind slams against shutters. Noise, pressure, force. But the house still stood. Inside me, an inner dialogue rose. If I open this door, even a crack, I let him perform his script again. If I remain here, Behind the line Richard built, the fortress holds. I finally spoke, my voice clear, carrying through the door, but not raised. Ethan, as I said in my message, please contact James O'Connor. All documents, all meetings, go through him, not me. Silence followed for a breath, broken only by his ragged exhale. Then came the pounding again, louder, furious. You think a lawyer will save you? You're old, Helen. You don't understand how the world works. Without us, you'll drown in paperwork. Do you want to end up alone? Broke? Confused? I pressed my back lightly against the door, steadying myself. I am not confused, I said. Calm, each word clipped. This conversation is over. The handle jerked once, twice, as though he might try to force it. My pulse leapt, but the lock held, and so did I. Finally, his steps retreated down the porch. A car door slammed. The engine roared and faded down the street. I stayed there for a long while, hand on the knob, forehead leaning against the wood. I felt the line between us, the literal threshold of the door, more powerfully than any courtroom or contract could declare. On one side, desperation clawed at me. On the other, silence kept me whole. I whispered into the stillness, half to Richard, half to myself. The line is drawn, and I chose not to cross it. When I finally stepped back, the room looked unchanged. The rug in its place, the table with 2 cups waiting, the roses bending outside the window. But inside me, everything had shifted. I had stood behind the line and not moved. I walked into the kitchen, poured the tea that had cooled, and took a sip. It was bitter now, but strong. I carried the second cup to the window and set it down gently, the steam already gone, but the ritual intact. In that moment, I understood the motif of the door, the threshold. Each time I chose not to step out, each time I stayed firm on my side, I was not just refusing entry. I was affirming presence, my house, my voice, my dignity. Later that night, a text buzzed again. Only 3 words from Ethan. We'll be back. I placed the phone face down on the counter, the brass key pressed into my palm as I slid it into my pocket. The fortress stood, and so did I. That night, sleep did not come easily. I lay in bed listening to the ocean wind rattle the shutters, steady and low. The house creaked the way old houses do, but I knew the sound well enough to be comforted by it. Still, my mind would not rest. Images from years ago rose like lanterns in the dark, uninvited but welcome. I saw Richard again, as if time had folded in on itself. He was on the job site, sleeves rolled up, his flannel shirt sticking to his back. Red and white checks, faded from years of salt and sun. The air smelled of sawdust mixed with ocean spray, the peculiar perfume of his life's work. The gulls wheeled overhead. The crash of waves punctuated the rhythm of hammers. He turned to me once, his forehead damp, his smile broad and tired. "Helen," he called, voice cutting through the clang of metal. "Smell that?" Salt and sweat. That's the smell of permanence. He ran his hand along the beam of a half-finished villa, as though he were greeting an old friend. If a wall can stand against the ocean, it can stand against anything. I watched him in memory, and in my heart, I whispered back, what about storms that rise inside a family? The question lingered long after the flash of memory faded. I sat up, reached for the cardigan draped on the chair, and slipped it over my shoulders. The brass key in the pocket knocked lightly against my side. I walked down to the kitchen, the house dark except for the glow of the moon through lace curtains. I lit a small lamp and sat at the table. 2 cups waited out of habit. I poured hot water over the tea leaves, steam curling upward like ghosts of every conversation ever held at that table. I wrapped my hands around the cup, breathing warmth into my chest. Then I spoke, not to Richard this time, but to myself. If I sign, I said aloud, I may keep my daughter near. She may smile again. She may call me soft, generous, forgiving. But I will have lost myself. I will have dismantled the fortress he built with his own hands. I will be a guest in my own life. I sipped, the bitterness grounding me. If I do not sign, I continued, I may keep the fortress. I may keep my name, my dignity, the wall Richard and I raised brick by brick. But I may lose her. I may lose Lydia to resentment, to Ethan's persuasion, to the notion that her mother became her enemy. The words cracked something inside me. Tears slipped down my face and fell into the cup, a salt that joined the tea. Richard, I whispered, my voice shaking. You asked me to be strong, but strength feels like breaking sometimes. You built villas to withstand storms. I am trying to withstand one too, but it is my own daughter pressing against the walls. I closed my eyes and let the silence answer. It wrapped around me, heavy and honest. A memory rose again, softer this time. Lydia at 5, running barefoot along the beach near one of Richard's nearly finished houses. Her laughter tangled with the gulls' cries. Richard had lifted her onto his shoulders, her hair a golden halo in the sun. I had stood nearby, holding the picnic basket, thinking the world was solid, unbreakable. Now that same daughter looked at me with suspicion, her trust chipped by Ethan's words, by her own longing to fix what was broken in her marriage. And I, the mother, was left to decide, surrender to keep her close, or resist and risk losing her. The lamp's glow trembled on the table, my shadow flickering against the wall. I set my cup down and pressed my palms together, a gesture half prayer, half plea. I cannot have both, I said into the quiet. Not now, not in this season. The brass key pressed against my thigh where the cardigan pocket sagged. I touched it, letting the cool weight remind me of Richard's hand that last night. His grip had been fierce, his words unyielding. Don't sign. One day you'll understand. I do understand, I admitted through tears. I understand the cost. The price of dignity is sometimes distance. The price of saying no is watching the people you love walk away. The house did not answer, but it held me. The roses outside brushed the siding again, whispering in the wind. I breathed deeply, let the air fill me, and felt the sob ease into stillness. I sat there until the lamp's bulb warmed the glass shade and the tea cooled. My tears dried, leaving only the taste of salt at the corner of my lips. Finally, I stood. I placed the untouched second cup by the window, where the moonlight silvered its rim. I touched the doorframe as I passed, feeling the threshold beneath my palm, remembering the pounding fists of earlier that week. And I realized something. The fortress was not just paper. The fortress was me. Each time I chose not to sign, not to open, not to surrender, I became one more brick in the wall. I returned to bed, lay down, and closed my eyes. Sleep did not come immediately, but peace did. A fragile peace, but mine. The next week unfolded like a series of small, steady steps, each one firmer than the last. James and I met 3 times at his office, a space that smelled of old books and lemon oil. His desk was cluttered with files, but he handled each paper as though it were a stone added to a wall. First, the deeds. He pulled out thick envelopes stamped with the county seal. "We'll re-record every property," he explained, "so the chain of title is airtight. No one can slip in a claim through the back door." I signed line after line, each stroke of my pen a reaffirmation. The notary's seal hit with a thud. That sound had become a drumbeat of my new life. Next, HIPAA forms. James slid them across the desk. "These decide who speaks for you in medical crises," he said. "Richard made sure your healthcare proxy was clear, but it needs updating. Ethan has no standing now. Margaret will be your primary. Your physician, secondary." I hesitated only for a breath before signing. The pen moved smoother than before. The seal thudded again. Then came the credit freezes. James had a paralegal dial each bureau on speakerphone so I could hear the confirmations. Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. My voice spelled out my social security number, steady and unshaken. The operators recited confirmation codes, each one sounding like a secret password. James handed me slips of paper with the codes in blue ink. "Keep these safe. They're stronger than any lock on a door." We prepared certified letters too. James had me sign the bottom of each page before he slid them into envelopes, the green and white cards already clipped to the front. "Return receipts," he explained. "Proof of delivery. Proof of action." By the end of the third meeting, my hands no longer trembled when I lifted the pen. They moved with the quiet certainty of a teacher correcting a child's spelling, deliberate and calm. Back at home, I pinned each green receipt to the corkboard in my kitchen. The board had once held school photos, shopping lists, and reminders for parent-teacher conferences. Now it displayed a new gallery. Bien Han Son, each one a flag of survival. They stood in rows like soldiers, and each time I passed by, I felt Richard's hand steadying mine. Meanwhile, the world outside reacted. I heard it first from Margaret, who saw Ethan storm out of the bank downtown, his tie loosened, his jaw tight. She told me he had tried to transfer something. She didn't know what, but the clerk shook her head and handed his papers back. Later, James confirmed it. Ethan had attempted to change mailing addresses and beneficiary information on one of the property accounts. But the freeze, the recorded deeds, and the attorney of record rules stopped him cold. "They flagged it immediately," James said, a rare smile tugging his lips. "He can't move an inch without tripping alarms now." Justice by process. No gavel, no shouting, just paper, stamps, signatures, systems clicking into place exactly as they were meant to. I imagined Ethan at the counter, his charm cracking as the clerk explained policies he could not bend, his pen hovering uselessly above a form he could not complete, his frustration spilling into the parking lot where no one cared to hear it. At home, I stood before the corkboard, running my finger over the green cards pinned in neat rows. Each thud of the notary seal, each code from the credit bureaus, each certified letter returned. Together, they were louder than any argument. One evening, Lydia called. Her voice was flat, as though rehearsed. "Ethan says the bank made a mistake. He says we'll straighten it out." I listened quietly, then answered in the same tone I had written to Ethan before. "Please direct everything through James. I won't be discussing documents or accounts directly." Silence hung heavy between us. I could almost hear her swallow. "You really don't trust me," she whispered. I pressed my palm against the corkboard, feeling the pinheads like small nails beneath my skin. "I trust you enough to stay your mother," I said softly. "That's why I cannot sign. One day, You may see it." She ended the call quickly. My hand lingered on the board. That night, I brewed tea and sat with 2 cups again. I stared at the empty one across the table. "Richard," I murmured. The fortress held. The storm slammed, but the walls did not break. The roses outside bent under a gust of wind, then straightened again. I sipped my tea slowly, the taste bitter but grounding. The house was silent except for the steady tick of the clock. The silence no longer felt like chains. It felt like judgment, delivered not by anger, but by order. Justice by process. Paper and ink becoming the quiet roar of dignity. When I rose to turn off the kitchen light, the green receipts glowed faintly under the lamp, like lighthouses lined along a shore. I knew storms would keep coming, but the signals were in place. The line was drawn, and I had chosen not to cross it. Late afternoon light lay across the porch like a warm shawl. I stood at the edge of the steps with the hose in my hand, giving the roses a slow drink the way Richard taught me, close to the roots, no splash on the leaves. Water threaded into the soil and disappeared, the sound a soft hush against the hum of the neighborhood. A car eased to the curb. The engine cut. I did not turn right away. I finished the bush I was on, twisted the nozzle to a fine mist, and let it settle over the last bloom, a stubborn coral rose that refused to open all the way. "Mom." Lydia's voice came from the walkway, not the driveway. She had parked on the street and walked up without the drama of tires on gravel. I shut off the hose and coiled it slowly, giving my breath time to find an even rhythm. When I looked up, she was at the gate, fingers hooked over the latch, watching me as if I might vanish if she blinked too fast. We stood like that for a beat, a mother and a daughter separated by a waist-high fence, and a month that felt longer than any winter. The brass key in my cardigan pocket touched my hip. The weight steadied me. "Garden looks good," she said, voice low. "It's holding," I answered. Storms came. Roots remembered she opened the gate and stepped in, careful not to brush the thorns. On the porch, the screen door was propped. Not open, not closed. Door ajar, my favorite compromise. "I brought you something." She lifted a small brown bag. Inside, I saw lemons and ginger, the makings of the tea I drink when sleep has edges. She had paid attention. That alone loosened something in my chest. We moved to the steps. I sat on the top one. She chose the one below, close, but not touching. A cardinal flashed red across the yard and vanished into the oak. "I talked to Ethan," she said. "I told him everything has to go through James now. He was angry. He said I was choosing you over our future." She swallowed. "I told him I was choosing my mother over a plan that felt like quicksand." I kept my hands folded, thumbs resting on the line of my skirt. How did he take that? "He said I was naive. He said you had poisoned me against him." She looked up at me then. "Did you?" "No," I said. "You asked for room to think. I gave it. I let the quiet stand between us like a table set for tea." She stared at her knees. "I keep hearing your sentence. Trust is not the same as sign-in. I tried to hate it. I could not." She laughed once. It sounded brittle and brave at the same time. I asked myself why I was so desperate for you to sign. The answer wasn't pretty. I waited. "Because I thought a signature would fix everything," she said. "Our bills, his pride, the story I tell myself about being a good wife. I wanted an easy door. Your no forced me to see the hallway." Wind lifted a few petals from the nearest bloom and set them down by her shoe. She did not brush them away. I was cruel to you, she said, not with shouting, with the kind of pressure that wears your name like a coat. I am sorry. I let air out slowly. The apology did not erase the weeks, but it laid a plank across them. I know where that pressure comes from, I said. It comes from fear dressed like duty. I have worn that coat too. She faced the yard again. I don't know what I am going to do about Ethan. I am not asking for advice. I am not asking you to fight him for me. She hesitated, then added, almost a whisper, I am asking for time. You have it, I said. A minute passed. The neighborhood settled into the soft sounds of dinner beginning somewhere. A screen door squeaked and clicked down the block. Someone knocked dust from a welcome mat. The world kept its ordinary list. Lydia shifted and looked up. I still think about the wedding, she said. I see you behind those flowers. I should have moved that arrangement with my own hands. I should have asked where you wanted to sit. I survived it, I said. So did you. I did not want survival, she answered. I wanted celebration that included you. There was no easy reply to that. I let the silence hold both truths. What had happened? What should have? She reached into the brown bag, took out a lemon, pressed it into my palm. James called me, she said. He explained the trust, the triggers, the reason Dad wrote things the way he did. He did not scold. He told me he wished more daughters asked questions before they asked for pens. That sounds like James, I said. She managed a small smile. He also said I could bring you to his office next week to pick up copies of the recorded deeds. He said sometimes touching the paper helps. It does, I said. The seals sound like gavel taps without the performance. We sat with that. The sky shifted toward evening. I could smell salt in the air, a tide turning somewhere just out of sight. Finally, she said what she'd come to say. I will think more. I won't press you again. I can't promise I won't be angry some days. I can promise I will not confuse anger with permission. I nodded once. Not triumph, recognition. Thank you, I said. The doors open when respect knocks. Her mouth trembled. She steadied it with a deep breath. She stood, smoothing her skirt the way she had on her wedding day, only slower, as if unlearning a habit. At the gate, she paused, turned back. Mom. Yes. I never stopped loving you. I felt the words land in my chest and make room. I know, I said. I kept the porch light on. She nodded, almost shy, and lifted the latch. The gate swung. The cardinal called once from the oak, a bright note. Lydia walked back to her car. She did not look over her shoulder. She did not need to. I picked up the hose, turned the nozzle to mist again, and finished the last rose. When I reached the porch, I noticed the screen door was still propped, a little open, a little closed. I left it that way. Then I went inside to put lemons in the bowl, ginger on the counter, and a kettle on the flame. The brass key tapped against the table when I set it down next to the cutting board. I pressed my thumb to it, felt the cool metal, and said the line that had carried me across every room. Boundaries keep love alive. The kettle began to sing. I set out 2 cups, one for me, one for what we are still mending. The evening after Lydia's visit, I found myself standing in the kitchen longer than usual. The light outside dimmed into the blue that comes just before night, when the roses fade to silhouettes and the house hums with its own quiet. I brewed tea and set out 2 cups, though I had no appetite for either. My eyes kept drifting to the corkboard on the wall, heavy with green receipts and stamped pages, But what caught me wasn't the paper this time. It was the photo pinned in the corner. Richard in his checkered shirt, sleeves rolled, his smile steady. I pulled a slip of notepaper from the drawer and sat at the table, pen in hand. The air smelled faintly of lemon and ginger from what Lydia had brought. I wrote 3 simple lines. Nothing more, nothing less. I love my daughter. I will not sign. I am still here. The words looked plain, almost childlike, but as my pen lifted, I felt them settle in me like anchors. Each line was both confession and vow. I folded the paper once, then pinned it beside Richard's photo. The edges curled slightly, as if leaning toward him. His eyes, caught forever in that square of memory, seemed to meet mine. For the first time in months, I did not feel like I was writing to the past. I felt like I was writing for the future. I stepped back, looking at the board. Green receipts, legal seals, proof of battles won without shouting. And now, one small slip of paper carrying the truths I wanted no court, no bank, no child to mistake. The house was still, but not empty. The silence had shape now, like walls and windows that framed a life I had chosen to keep. I walked to the porch, flicked the switch, and watched the light bloom across the steps. The bulb glowed golden against the deepening dusk, casting shadows onto the roses swaying in the breeze. For months, I had wondered whether Lydia would return, whether she would step back through the threshold with questions or anger or quiet resolve. Tonight, the porch light burned for her all the same. The door behind me remained ajar, the screen tilted open just enough to let the night air in. Not locked against the world, not wide open to intrusion. A line drawn, but not a wall. I leaned on the railing, hose coiled neatly at my feet. The neighborhood sounds drifted in. Children finishing a game down the block, a dog barking once, then quiet. I remembered that wedding night, how I had been seated behind a column of orchids near the exit door, invisible to the laughter and the photographs. That memory had cut deep. Yet now, standing here with the porch light burning and the door propped, I realized something. At the wedding, I had been placed at the edge of someone else's picture, a ghost in a moment that was supposed to include me. But here, in my own home, with my own boundaries, I was no longer invisible. I was the owner of my life. The circle had closed, but gently, like the tide pulling back to shore, not a slammed door. Inside, the slip of paper fluttered slightly under the ceiling fan. I love my daughter. I will not sign. I am still here. The 3 truths coexisted, not canceling each other out. I touched the brass key in my pocket one last time before setting it on the table inside. It did not need to press against me anymore. It could rest, visible, as part of the life I had chosen to guard. The kettle whistled faintly. Tea ready again. I poured into one cup and left the other across the table, steam rising into the soft air. One for me, one for memory, or maybe one for hope. As night deepened, I whispered into the quiet. Richard, I did as you asked, but I also did more. I stayed myself, and I stayed a mother. The roses bent, caught in a breeze, then straightened once more. The porch light hummed steadily, warm against the cool dark. I closed the door halfway, leaving the latch loose. Not shut, not surrendered. A door ajar, waiting. And for the first time in a long time, I breathed without weight on my chest. The fortress still stood. So did I will leave you with the truest thing I learned in this house with the porch light on. My silence is not surrender. It is a voice that carries farther than any shout. It drew a legal line when noise tried to blur it. It kept me whole so I could keep loving my daughter without handing over the map of my life. If you are standing at your own threshold right now, with a pen on one side and your name on the other, hear this from a woman who has signed many report cards and very few mistakes. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to ask for drafts 48 hours in advance. You are allowed to say, with kindness and a spine, "Please contact my attorney." Dignity is not stubbornness. It is stewardship. People will tell you that peace requires a signature. Sometimes peace requires a boundary. Sometimes love survives because you do not cross the line that would erase you. I love my daughter. I did not sign. I am still here. Those three can live in the same room. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know where you are watching from. Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, sunlight across your table, a list waiting on the fridge, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Porch lights glowing down your street, a kettle about to sing. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. If this story touched your heart, consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Around here, we do justice by process. We practice quiet courage. We keep the door ajar for respect. Now I want to ask you something honest. If it were you, would you keep silent as I did, or would you sign to keep the household calm? Would you trade your name for a moment of quiet, or hold your line and trust that real peace can stand? Await. Share your answer. Someone else reading will need the courage you have to give. At my kitchen corkboard, the green receipts still hang like small lighthouses. The photo of Richard smiles the way he did when a beam settled true. Next to him, my slip of paper waits, simple as breath. I love my daughter. I will not sign. I am still here. Every morning, I touch that paper before I turn on the porch light. It is my pledge to my past and my permission for the day ahead. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember this. Sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Ready to say yes to yourself. Ready to say no to what would make you smaller. Ready to stand in the home of your own life without apology. Take care. Keep your paperwork close. Keep your kindness closer. And if you must choose the boundary that lets love breathe. I will be here at the table with 2 cups, one for memory, one for hope. The porch light on, the door a little open, the night soft around the roses,